The bloodstains left by Dalan Balyut on the steppe had yet to dry. After a crushing defeat, Temüjin withdrew with his loyal force of 20,000 to the banks of the Onon River, a weary, wounded, and demoralized army. The boundless winds of the steppe circled each tent with a chilling loneliness. Temüjin's eyes were deep, his silence screaming louder than words. What they had lost at Dalan Balyut was not only warriors, it was honor, power, and the faith of the steppe tribes, now mingled with the soil in blood. But for Temüjin, this defeat was not an end, it was the threshold of rebirth. He knelt by the riverbank, his hands gripped the earth, the mixture of mud and blood in his palms flowing like an oath into the future. He gathered his loyal soldiers around him. He vowed to show them who the true master of the steppe would be. No longer would leadership rely on ancient traditions. A new order, founded on justice, was about to rise. Temüjin's first move was to reorganize his army. The units were structured under strict discipline. Looting was forbidden. Women and children were not to be harmed. Spoils of war would be shared equally, and everyone was to be held accountable to one another. This was a revolutionary concept for the steppe. This new system, called the Circle of Loyalty, became the cornerstone of Temüjin's ability to preserve his remaining strength. As the days passed, Temüjin began launching swift raids on smaller tribes to rebuild his power. His first target was the Temüjin tribe. A surprise night attack left them in chaos. Their leaders were slain, and the people sought refuge under Temüjin's justice. This victory was small, but sent ripples across the steppe. It was a signal, the herald of Temüjin's return. This period of recovery, which began on the banks of the Onon River, transformed Temüjin into more than a tribal leader. He became the architect of a new steppe order built on discipline and justice. The winds of the steppe now whispered his name. Those whispers would soon rise into a roar, proclaiming the rebirth of Temüjin. After Dalan Balyut, Jamuka's camp was gripped with the euphoria of victory. His 30,000-strong army was now the largest on the steppe. Allied tribes gathered to share the spoils of triumph. Ceremonies were held. Cups brimming with kumis were raised high, and victory songs echoed through the night. Piles of loot filled the camp: horses, silk fabrics, gold. But most striking of all were the heads of 70 young warriors loyal to Temüjin, impaled on stakes and displayed in the square as a grim warning to all. Jamuka sat proudly on his throne. In the eyes of the steppe, he was now the absolute leader. The tribal aristocracy knelt around him, grateful for his preservation of the traditional order. A mocking phrase lingered on Jamuka's lips. "Speaking of Temüjin," he sneered, "a defeated dog may bark, but it no longer has teeth to bite." To him, Temüjin was no longer a threat. Yet this intoxication of victory blinded him to the first cracks forming within his ranks. Disputes over the division of spoils sparked unrest among the smaller tribes. Jealousies began to brew among the old aristocratic families, and whispers of discontent spread as some tribal leaders grew uneasy with Jamuka's tightening grip on power. When news arrived that the Temüjin tribe had been crushed in a surprise raid by Temüjin, Jamuka frowned for the first time. Yet he still dismissed it as a trivial matter. His army was vast, his power secure. A minor tribal skirmish could not tarnish his prestige. But as whispers spread across the steppe, praising Temüjin's sense of justice, they signaled not just a threat, but a yearning for an alternative form of leadership. Jamuka continued to revel in his victory, yet the murmurs among the tribes were reaching his ears. Temüjin was returning, and this time he would not face just a tribal chief, but the architect of a new order. The steppe was stirring once more. Temüjin's small victories and his disciplined circle of loyalty had sparked the rise of a new power around him. His army now numbered 30,000. Strengthened further by an alliance with Togrul, Khan of the Kereit, Temüjin no longer faced Jamuka's traditional order alone. This time, he felt the growing support of tribes eager to join his circle and embrace a new way of leadership.
Jamuka, meanwhile, struggled to hold his old alliance together. Quarrels over spoils and clashes of authority had opened cracks within his army. While smaller tribes showered Temüjin with praise for his justice, Jamuka's leadership was increasingly called into question. A saying began to spread across the steppe: "Jamuka may have the numbers, but Temüjin has the circle." The paths of the two leaders were destined to cross once more. On the windswept plains of Kalakaljit, the victor would be decided not only by military might, but by the faith of the people. On one side stood Jamuka, guardian of tradition. On the other, Temüjin's circle, clenched like an iron fist. The fate of the steppe would be written in blood once again. The winds of the steppe no longer carried the scent of peace, they carried the warning of an approaching storm. Temüjin, having expanded the circle of loyalty he had forged by the Onon River, was regaining his strength through a string of small victories. His army now numbered 30,000, and his alliance with Torol, Khan of the Kereit, gave him newfound confidence. Disciplined, just, and swift, Temüjin's force had become more than an army, it was a movement. For him, this was not merely a war, it was a direct challenge to the traditional order of the steppe. On Jamuka's side, things were unfolding differently. The intoxication of victory after Dalan Baljut had faded, giving way to growing unrest. Disputes over the division of spoils, rising jealousy among the tribes, and Temüjin's string of small victories had begun to erode Jamuka's former strength. Yet he still commanded a vast army. He had rallied around 30,000 men. The two leaders now faced each other with forces equal in number, but the spirit within their ranks was anything but the same. Across the sweeping plains of Kalakaljit, the two armies stood face to face. A heavy silence hung over the steppe, thick with anticipation. Temüjin's soldiers, forged in the discipline of his new order, stood like a wall, unyielding and focused. Jamuka's forces were magnificent in size, yet they bore the air of a disorganized multitude. Before the battle began, Temüjin turned to his soldiers and declared, "We are not the army of traditions, we are the army of the future. Here, it is loyalty and justice that will claim victory." The clash opened with a sudden assault from Jamuka. His strategy, as always, relied on brute force, but Temüjin's army responded with steel-like discipline. Moving in small, coordinated units, his soldiers sliced through Jamuka's massive formations, breaking them apart piece by piece. Each strike deepened the disarray within Jamuka's ranks, turning his great force into a splintered horde. After hours of brutal combat, the steppe was strewn with corpses. Through strategy and the unyielding discipline of his army, Temüjin seized the upper hand. Jamuka's forces began to unravel. One by one, his allies fled the battlefield, leaving Temüjin's circle as the lone, unbroken power standing in the heart of the steppe. Jamuka left Kalkaljit as little more than a shadow. His dream of becoming the steppe's absolute master was buried in blood that day. Temüjin, on the other hand, emerged from victory, promising a new order for the steppe. He was no longer just a leader, he had become its iron fist, a symbol of justice and loyalty. The Battle of Kalkaljit changed the fate of the steppe forever. It marked the first great step in Temüjin's transformation into legend, the rise of Genghis Khan. The steppe would never again be the same. Traditions gave way to discipline, fear yielded to justice, and the architect of this new order was the man who once knelt by the banks of the Onon River. 1201. Kalakaljit, the steppe's new breath. On the blood-soaked plains of Kalakaljit, Temüjin declared his victory. Jamuka, once his sworn brother, had been defeated a second time. His army was shattered, and the tribes had lost faith in him. Meanwhile, Temüjin continued to expand his circle of loyalty, forging his disciplined army into an even greater force. But this raises a question. Is a leader's power measured solely by his victories, or is true leadership the ability to command respect, even in the eyes of his enemies? On the steppe, two visions of leadership were now in conflict. 1201. Kalakaljit, the steppe's new breath. On the blood-soaked plains of Kalakaljit, Temüjin declared his victory. Jamuka, once his sworn brother, had been defeated a second time. His army was shattered, and the tribes had lost faith in him. Meanwhile, Temüjin continued to expand his circle of loyalty, forging his disciplined army into an even greater force. But this raises a question. Is a leader's power measured solely by his victories, or is true leadership the ability to command respect, even in the eyes of his enemies? On the steppe, two visions of leadership were now in conflict. The silence of the steppe was broken by the heavy march of Temüjin's army. The year 1202 would become another test of his leadership. The bitter defeat he had suffered at Dalan Baljut had been avenged at Kalakaljit, but the tribes of the steppe still seized every chance to question his authority. Temüjin had strengthened his circle of loyalty and instilled strict discipline into his forces. His army was now more than a mere instrument of war. It had become a movement, carrying its own creed and order across the steppe. This time, however, the target was not a strategic threat, but a deeply personal reckoning. The Merkit tribe, a name seared into Temüjin's memory for the cruelty they inflicted upon his family during his youth. After his father's death, Temüjin endured years of hardship. He never forgot the shame of his mother, Hoyalun, being abducted by the Merkits. For him, this was not just a campaign, it was the fulfillment of a vow. As his disciplined army advanced into Merkit lands, two questions lingered in Temüjin's mind. Would this act of vengeance solidify his leadership, or would it brand him as a ruthless avenger in the eyes of the steppe? True leadership, after all, is not only about defeating one's enemies, but about what one does after the victory is won. When the battle began, Temüjin's forces moved with steel-like precision against the Merkits' scattered tribal defenses. Their assaults were swift, their strikes deadly. The Merkits could not withstand such an organized onslaught. Their camps were set ablaze, their leaders killed or captured. The Merkit tribe was erased from the map of the steppe. Yet Temüjin's soldiers did not clamor for loot. Every victory was bound tightly to the principles of the circle of loyalty, forged with justice rather than greed. But at this very point, an unavoidable question rises for the audience.
Is a leader a prisoner of the shadows of his past? As Temüjin looked upon the annihilation of the Merkits, did he truly deliver justice, or was this the revenge of a boy scarred by childhood pain? On the steppe, his name was now spoken with as much hope as fear. From another perspective, this was Temüjin's inner test of leadership. A leader consumed by the fire of vengeance can, in time, burn even his own soldiers. Yet here, Temüjin kept his composure. Even as he avenged his past, he reminded his army of its principles. Merkit women and children were taken as captives, but not slaughtered. Spoils were distributed fairly. The steppe witnessed once again that Temüjin was not merely a warrior, but the architect of a new order. Even today, we ask, how far can a leader go while carrying the burdens of the past on his shoulders? Is revenge a reckoning or a chain that narrows a leader's vision? Had Temüjin broken that chain, or was he unknowingly forging new ones? The winds of the steppe were silent, but this silence heralded the dawn of a new era. In Temüjin's eyes, the Merkits were now nothing more than a shadow. Yet their destruction became the first great sign of the harsh rule that Genghis Khan would one day embody. The cold face of vengeance, even when tempered with justice, leaves a mark on a leader's soul. That mark was the moment the iron fist of the steppe began to take shape.
The secrets of the steppe are only just beginning to unfold. Temüjin's rise is leading him toward events that will tear him even from his closest allies. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe to the channel and witness the fate of the steppe with us.
Held the door, paid my dues, walked the line. Yeah, held the door, paid my dues, walked the line. But the world don't smile back when you're trying to shine. I was a good man, played by every rule, but life still used me like some kind of fool. Did right by all, and still I bled. Now I sleep in silence, heavy in my head. Gave my last dollar, turned the other cheek. Yeah, gave my last dollar, turned the other cheek. But kindness don't matter when the strong eat the weak. Watched the wicked rise while I stayed alone. Yeah, watched the wicked rise while I stayed alone. Truth is a burden, and it's all I know. I was a good man, played by every rule, but life still used me like some kind of fool. Did right by all, and still I bled.